Welcome back to Nutanix Live. I'm Angelo, Community Manager at Nutanix, and today I'll be talking to Steve Kaplan. Most of you folks know him as ROI Dude on Twitter. He's a friend of the community and also the author of The ROI Story, a very engaging and fun book that provides a framework to help guide IT decision makers. Welcome to Nutanix Live, Steve.
Thank you, Angelo.
Great to have you. I thought today we'd give folks an overview of your book and touch on getting the most out of their IT infrastructure.
Sounds great.
So I was curious, how did you get Mark Templeton, longtime CEO of Citrix, to write the foreword to your book?
You know, it's kind of funny. He actually wrote the foreword to my very first book that I wrote, that I co-authored many years ago. I used to run a Citrix Platinum partner, and so engaged with Mark back in those days, and co-authored a book on Citrix that actually Citrix made their official guide. And Mark wrote the foreword to that, and then wrote 7 more books total on Citrix over the years.
Yeah.
And he graciously agreed to, I introduced him to Dheeraj Pandey, the CEO of Nutanix, once I joined, and have kept in touch with him, and he very graciously agreed to write the foreword for this book.
Yeah, that's really cool. And for those that haven't seen the book, sort of peppered throughout the book, you have this ROI dude character. Can you give us a sense of how that came to be?
You know, I've always been into comics, essentially, and for in fact, I've even written a comic book series on virtualization, yeah, I just decided I needed an alter ego and came up with ROI Dude, even geekier version of me. That's ROI Dude there with Mark Templeton. And
yeah,
yeah,
I
funny
like
story.
the sandals.
And,
I like the sandals.
yeah, it's actually kind of funny story. When my book first came out in early May of last year, it was right before .next in Anaheim, and I had also injured my shoulder snowboarding. So I was in a sling, I was in some pain, and my hotel room, where I left my wallet, I had my credit card with me. It was quite a walk to the convention center, Anaheim Convention Center. And upon arriving, they had these signs, must have valid ID. And I wasn't concerned a bit. You know, I just walked up to one of the registration tables. I've worked at Nutanix over 6 years. I'm a speaker at this event. And that didn't work. So I asked to speak to a supervisor, and I was getting a bit concerned. I have a credit card, and I'm sorry, you must have a government-issued photo ID. So dreading the long walk back to my hotel in my sling, I was inspired by one last idea. I pulled out my brand new first copy of my book out of my backpack and flipped open to a picture of ROI Dude and pointed to it and said, look, that's me. And they let me in.
Yeah, that's a great story. And as I recall, reflecting back on .next, we had a great book signing there as well.
Yeah, I was amazed at the long lines.
Yeah, that's cool. And just to continue on the theme of your book, because it is about ROI, and sort of generally speaking, what should businesses do to sort of lower IT costs in this day and age?
Well, I think the most important thing is to first realize that, you know, that the purpose of IT is not to reduce the cost of IT, and it's to understand that the purpose of IT is to enable the business. So yeah, I think what's more important is how do they get the most value out of IT. I said, you know, that if people just care about cutting costs and just throw away all the PCs and go to calculators and paper and pencils, because nothing's less expensive than that. But clearly that would be extremely silly. So they want to optimize the value, and I think that starts with understanding what the business objectives are, and then figuring out what type of IT environment do we need to best optimize those business objectives, and primarily doing the math. Just so many times over my career in IT, I've seen decisions made without any of the economic due diligence that you would expect. And it doesn't mean just what's the upfront cost of one solution versus another, but what's the total economic impact of each solution over a number of years, looking at all the important variables.
Right. And to complement that and to borrow from your book, how can IT leaders build an ROI story?
I found over the years that even with really compelling numbers, a lot of times it's not enough to galvanize the decision makers into action, especially when comparing against a status quo environment that people are comfortable with, that it works reasonably well. Maybe there are, and meets security considerations and so on. And so even compelling numbers, can be dismissed. And what I found is really important is to look for an emotional hook. As an example, Concentra Healthcare, back to my virtualization days, we did an analysis. In their case, they had trouble getting the monies they needed to expand their small virtualization environment. They could only get $15,000 to $20,000 at a time. And when the CIO and I presented the ROI analysis results, which were very good, to senior management and a couple of the members of the board, of course we went over the numbers, but what we emphasized was that Concentra was running on a backup generator, and that the air conditioning needed $1 million overhaul. But even all that would be no guarantee with the hot Dallas summer months approaching and the ever increasing demand for more physical servers, that they wouldn't suffer prolonged outage. And essentially in that meeting, the CIO got tacit approval for the millions of dollars she needed to virtualize the entire data center. So it's looking for that emotional hook, and what better way to set an emotional hook than to tell a story?
Yeah, that's for sure. And as companies transition to working from home, folks are always looking for a key to obtaining a positive ROI for the work from home environment. Is there a key?
Yeah, I think there is a key. It's a big, broad topic, and of course, some people are using just straight VPN connectivity, and others are desktop as a service, and still many others are VDI. And I think the first thing is to understand the use case as it fits your company, your organization, and pick the right technology or collection of technologies. And the back-end infrastructure is extremely important, especially with a VDI solution. It's got to be agile enough and flexible enough so that it can be rapidly deployed. As an example, one of our customers is a large mortgage company who was running VDI on Nutanix, about I think several thousand employees. And a couple of months ago, when the work from home mandate came, the CIO said they were able to move all their employees throughout the company onto work from home in a week.
Wow.
And yeah, you with a legacy infrastructure with a SAN, where you'd have to order the SAN and maybe beef up your storage network and get everything set up and delivered and connected. There's just no possibility of that. So it means having the right infrastructure. I maintain has to be software defined, like Nutanix hyperconverged infrastructure, so that it can be extremely rapidly rolled out and expanded and managed, so that an organization is best prepared for whatever uncertainties come down the road in this very uncertain time.
Yeah, and I really encourage folks to grab a copy of the book, download it from the website. We'll have links to that. But you state in the book that legacy data center model is broken. Can you give us an example of that, and how do you validate the accuracy of that analysis?
Yeah, I think there's all kinds of examples of that. Just for one, the inability for an organization to quickly shift and scale out to work from home to thousands of employees. One of my favorite examples, though, is just shadow IT. There's an analyst on my team who used to be a manager in infrastructure department for a global organization. And one day he gets a call from his SAN manufacturer, and he says, "Hey, where do you want the new SAN?" He goes, "What new SAN? I didn't order a new SAN. We're fine on storage." And after doing some investigating, he learned that the marketing department a few years ago had surreptitiously set up a very small IT department that now had grown to 150 people.
Ooh.
And perhaps a particularly egregious example of shadow IT. It's hardly unique. I suspect that nearly every legacy IT department has to deal with some kind of shadow IT, as the business, frustrated by what they often call the Department of No, takes IT matters into their own hands. And by the way, I think that same frustration is the biggest driver behind this kind of hype to lift and shift to public cloud. In my frequent conversations with organizations across the globe, I'll often hear, many times proudly, we have a cloud-first policy or strategy. And as an analyst, I ask, why? And a lot of times there's quiet and, oh, well, the board told us to do it, or everybody's doing it. Now, sometimes I do hear something like, we want more agility, we want faster time to market. Great reasons to go to cloud, whether public or on-prem, because cloud, after all, is an operating model. It's not a destination. But by far and away, the most common reason I hear for a cloud-first policy is we want to save money. And my response, fantastic. We all want to save money.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing your analysis with me? And nobody ever has, because you don't go to public cloud to save money, at least not for predictable workloads, which just so happen to make up the majority of workloads for most organizations. So in my book, I give a 10-step recommended guide for how to approach a TCO for public cloud. There's a lot of different factors to consider. And again, it's doing the math. Before coming up with a cloud first, or even worse, a cloud only policy. Almost all, in fact, I won't even say almost, every leading analyst I've seen all say that the hybrid cloud model is already predominant and will be even more predominant in the future. So it makes sense to at least look at that model and figure out economically and otherwise, where do different workloads belong? Do they belong on-prem? Do they belong public cloud? If public cloud, which public cloud? How do I manage this whole environment? So again, the financial analysis provides a great framework for kind of stripping back the hype of public cloud, for shining a spotlight on the bias of legacy IT infrastructure, status quo infrastructure, so that an organization can make the best decision for its environment.
Right. Great. And finally, just to pivot on a personal note, if I have this right, and of course you correct me, but I hear you hold a world record for the number of different yoga studios attended. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, hot yoga, the Bikram style. It's an imaginary record. I'm the only one that I know of that tracks it. Nobody else would ever care. But
Right.
yeah, 125 different studios, 1,941 different classes across 17 countries.
Wow.
So I'm a numbers guy. I track everything.
Sure. That's great. Thank you, Steve, for taking the time today to speak with me. Looking forward to having you back on Nutanix Live at some point, and hearing about your upgraded yoga numbers. So thanks so much. And for those,
pleasure.
Great. And for those watching, thank you. And I will see you on the next Nutanix Live.